Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the MTD Board of Directors meeting on July 20th, 2021. I hope everyone's had a good beginning of summer. Good weather's here right now. We're going to start this morning's meeting with a roll call of the Board of Directors. Director Perotti?
Here.
Director Lemberger? Not here yet. Director McQuarrie?
Here.
Director Sheeler?
Present.
Vice Chair Tabor?
Here.
And Chair Davis. We do have a quorum. That takes us to the report regarding the posting of the agenda, please. Madam Clerk?
Good morning.
Good morning.
The agenda was posted on Friday, July 16th, 2021 at MTD's administrative office, mailed and emailed to those on the agenda list and posted on MTD's website.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Next item, as a ceremonial item, the oath of office to our new board director, Arjun Sarkar. Congratulations, Mr. Sarkar.
Thank you, Dave.
We will start with an oath of office here. And so you could raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I, Arjun Sarkar.
I, Arjun Sarkar,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I'll bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
and I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I am about to enter.
the duties that I'm about to enter.
Congratulations, Mr. Sarkar. Welcome to join us.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard, Arjun.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, all. I really appreciate everyone's support and bringing me on the board. I look forward to working with you all.
You're a great addition to our board. I know we all basically enjoy working with you in your new capacity here. We're looking forward for good things. So, okay, we're going to move on with the agenda this morning. That takes us to the consent calendar. There are two items here. The approval of the minutes for the meeting of June 15th, 2021, and item 6, the cash reports for the following dates, June 5th through June 25th, 2021, and June 26th through July 9th, 2021. Are there any questions on either of these two items? Mr. Director Sheeler.
Thank you, Chair. This has to do with the cash report. First, I wanted to say it was great to see passenger fares showing up again on the cash report. And the question that I had is that The first one we have is June 5th through June 25th. So that's a 20-day period. And it's showing passenger fares of 189,000. And then the next cash report we've got is for a period of June 26th through July 9th, which is only 13 days, just a period of time. But that number is only 82,000. So it just seems like a pretty big discrepancy for the differentials in time. And I was just wondering if maybe that was due to pent up demand and people at the very beginning going out and buying the 10 ride passes at that very first week.
Mr. Estrada?
Yeah, I don't have the details. I'll certainly look into it, but I believe your assumption is correct. I mean, there are probably some significant bus pass purchases early on, but we'll confirm that and get you an answer.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from directors, board members? Okay, not seeing any. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Mr. Chair, motion to approve.
I'll take Director Perotti. How about a second? Director Tabor is the second. Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Director Perotti.
Aye.
Director Lemberger is absent. Director McQuarrie. Chuck, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you.
There we go.
Director Sheeler.
Yes.
Director Sarkar.
I'll abstain.
Okay. Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
Chair Davis votes yes. Consent calendar is approved. Thank you all very much. Including the consent calendar takes us to public comment for anyone who wishes to speak on items within our purview, but not on today's agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone wishing to speak under general public comment?
I don't have any public comment at this time.
Good, thank you very much. Takes us to our first item on the agenda for staff presentation. Item 8, capital financing options presentation. Director or General Manager Estrada, you want to open this item?
Yes, good morning, Chair Davis, members of the board. With us today is Ms. Melissa Schick of K&N Public Finance and Mr. Nadev, who have worked with myself and Mr. Davis, our Director of Finance and Administration, to get us to this point. Before they start their presentation, which is a discussion of our financing approach and potential, our alternatives, I wanted to provide a little overview of where MTD is with its capital project program at this point. Next slide, please. Okay, just a quick background about MTD. Currently, our fleet's about 114 buses. We have one active facility, another one, Terminal 2 in Goleta, which we're beginning to read the recommissioning process. Our urbanized area as of 2010 is under 200,000, just under 200,000 in population. We're anticipating that we'll exceed 200,000, which has some financial impacts on the district, which is discussion for another day on the operating side. As a county, we're under 500,000, and our ridership pre-pandemic was over 6 million annually as far as passengers. And as you can see from the graph below, on a passengers per hour basis, MTD scores very high. Those other communities you see there in black are communities that are 200,000 to 1 million in population. Our average passengers per hour exceeded those particular communities. So MTD's, what I'm getting at essentially is the need for public transit, or the demand for it on the South Coast, is very significant, which comes with the revenue hours that were required and the frequency to meet that demand. But with that comes a need to replace our capital assets, our buses and our fleet as well. Next slide. Quickly, I'm not going to go through every one of these bullet points, but this is what we call our next wave project. And it's really building on MT's success as the leader in battery electric buses in North America. We had the largest fleet for decades. We were surpassed, recently over the past years but we still are a leader. And as you can see, the first few components, first three really, MTD's done a lot of work over the last few years. We've introduced the 30-foot battery electric buses, the BYDs, to our fleet with all the chargers and infrastructure that was needed here at Terminal 1 to support them. We also completed our facilities master plan that identified the needs not only for Terminal 1 in downtown Santa Barbara, but also the recommissioning of Terminal 2 in Goleta, and which is critical for us moving forward. We also completed the zero emission bus modeling study to make sure that the battery electric essentially drivetrain is appropriate for our service here in Santa Barbara, and I think we're well suited for that. I'm not going to list all the projects, but the one I wanted to highlight today, which we've focused on for the discussion that's about to begin, is Terminal 2, the recommissioning and the build out of that particular facility, how critical it is to MTD. In order to do it, we're going to need quite a bit of funding to get there. Obviously, when you look at future phases, really what it boils down to is replacing the remainder of the fleet with zero emission buses and ensuring that we have the infrastructure and the resiliency to support those buses once they're here. Next slide. Okay, here what I wanted to lay out for you is kind of how we've performed on a competitive basis, funding grant applications really since 2014. And I've broken them up into three categories: federal, California, the state, and local. And there was obviously an attachment to the staff report, which went into detail in each of these, but I've summarized them and laid them out by fiscal year. But I really wanted to highlight two pots here. One at federal and one at the state level. At the federal level, it's a 5339B for bus and bus facilities. As you can see, that's where really the big wins need to come on the competitive basis. We were successful back in 2016. We received $5.6 million to replace 14 buses. We've consistently gone after funding every year since then. We've not been successful. This year, 2021, is still pending. We will aggressively pursue funding for our projects, likely the Terminal 2 and some bus replacement. But the other one that's critical to us, we believe, is the Transit Intercity Rail and Capital Program, the state funding source. That's got the chance for some rather large awards. We were successful in 2018 when we partnered with SBCAG. They received, I think, nearly 10 million. We received 1.5 for our projects, but it was they were the lead on that. Going forward, we're going to need to really get out front and look for a significant award for some of our projects as well on the state side. And as KNN discusses our options and alternatives, I think it'll become clear with the federal amounts that you're allowed to apply towards a project, that sort of thing, that we're going to need state, we're going to need local. We may need to borrow some funds as well to get our capital program through the next 10 to 15 years. So next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Ms. Schick and Mr. Nadev to give you their presentation, which the clerk will switch them out right now here in a moment, so they can lay out what we've discussed and what some of our alternatives are. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, Ms. Schick, Mr. Nadev, and we will get your slides up in just 1 second.
Great, thank you.
I apologize, I'm having some technical difficulties. One of my monitors went dark. Give me just 1 moment.
No problem.
If it makes life easier and it's allowed, we could share our screens as well. We're standing by. There we are.
There you
There
go.
we go.
You made it happen just by making that off. Good job. Okay, floor is yours. Go ahead. Good morning.
Well, great. Next slide, please. We'll start. So good morning, directors, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Melissa Schick, and I'm joined by my colleague Nedko Nedev. And we are with the firm KNN Public Finance. KNN Public Finance is a municipal advisory firm, and we have been retained by MTD. We've been working closely with Jerry and Brad on just some preliminary planning and analysis related to potential capital improvement needs. KNN works with a number of California local government agencies with regard to planning and analysis of capital improvement projects, as well as providing oversight and guidance with an actual borrowing that local government may pursue. So on this slide, we list some of the activities we do in working with our municipal clients, but mostly just to underscore that the role of the municipal advisor is a regulated role. And the SEC assigns us a fiduciary duty. And so really by law, it's our job to put our clients' best interest ahead of our own. So our role is to assist you and provide an overview of alternatives with the overall objective of achieving a result that is in your best interest. Next slide. So this slide highlights the 5-year CIP of the district. And this was something that Nedco and I reviewed closely with Jerry and Brad in our discussions over the last several months. But mostly, as Jerry noted in his introduction, is that what we are focused on with regard to considering funding alternatives is really for the T2 project. And we see it as in 2 phases. And on this slide, we emphasize the first phase, and it's just the reactivation of T2 for interim operations. And the current projection is the total project cost for that phase to be $12 million, with certain costs spread across fiscal 21 through 25. So really just a 5-year projection of those capital needs for the project. Next slide. So in working with other of our public agency clients, really there's kind of 2 primary options for public infrastructure projects. The first is on a pay-as-you-go basis, right? Using cash, grants, capital reserves, and available revenues. And in speaking with Jerry and Brad, this first approach is probably the best and most efficient approach for a public agency, in that, in borrowing, you incur an interest cost. So that's the first objective, is to try to identify available non-borrowing resources. And I think that Jerry laid that out in his introduction. However, if a project, if it's critical to advance funding for a project to get it constructed in a reasonable period of time, or if there is a funding gap, often a public agency will borrow to effectuate a capital improvement project. And that can come in the form of a loan, or oftentimes with the issuance of municipal bonds. So we work closely with public agencies to devise a plan of finance, which it tends to be the most optimal plan will be some combination of cash or grants, revenue contribution, and potentially a borrowing. Next slide. If there is a need for a borrowing, there's a couple tools that we're accustomed to utilizing. The first is tools that would address interim borrowing needs. So as a project is in its infancy stages and potentially needs some seed funding to get the project kickstart, it's often the case that an agency will pursue a small loan with potentially their commercial bank, or put in place a line of credit, which you could draw on as needed through the initial construction and planning stages. When kind of the timing and amount of a larger scale project is known, it's often the case that the borrowing becomes more permanent, and an agency would pursue a long-term borrowing solution. In our world, the long-term borrowing solution tends to be the issuance of tax-exempt municipal bonds in the public market, but there's certainly other alternatives to that on a long-term basis, each of which the state and federal governments have loan programs, and we'll get to this in the next several slides, but the U.S. Department of Transportation has a TIFIA loan program that we have seen a number of the district's peer transit agencies pursue a loan under this program. Actually, NEDCO and I are working with 3 other transit agencies in the pursuit of a federal loan for a long-term borrowing. Next slide. So this just lays out in pictures what I just discussed, in that a capital project will have different levels of spending needs over the course of the construction, planning and construction period. And it's often the case in potentially the first couple years of a project that funding needs are lower. And then once a project advances into kind of full-term construction, funding needs tend to be higher. And so in this case, in the first couple years of the T2 project and anticipated expenditure levels, it would be reasonable to assume that the district would use some sort of interim strategy to meet its funding needs. And potentially, once the project is underway and there's larger borrowing and construction needs, a longer term funding solution would be put in place. Oftentimes, a longer term funding solution also can be used to reimburse an interim borrowing or reimburse cash that was contributed at the initial phases of a project. Next slide. So this provides kind of a big picture of really the 2 long-term borrowing tools available to the district. Now we focus on long-term because long-term is really where you would incur the greatest amount of borrowing costs over the life. And this is the area where a solution on a long-term basis will obviously impact the district's budget for a greater period of time. The 2 tools used mostly by the district's peer transit agencies is the issuance of municipal bonds. So that's the sale of tax-exempt securities in the public bond market. And then the other tool that's recently been used with a good amount of frequency is the TIFIA loan program, where it would be a loan directly with the United States Department of Transportation. The TIFIA loan is attractive to public agencies in that there's a certain degree of flexibility afforded by it. It's a drawdown loan where you draw only what is needed, and during construction, you pay interest on only the amount that is needed. So that creates some funding and borrowing efficiencies for borrowers that municipal bonds doesn't necessarily afford. When you issue a bond, you issue it in a specific amount, receive a proceeds up front, and begin paying interest on the total amount of proceeds borrowed. The one complexity with the TIFIA loan is that upon defining the project, the TIFIA loan will only fund up to 33% of the project costs. So it's not the entire funding, cannot serve as the entire funding solution for a project. And so in that case, as Jerry mentioned, if pursuing a TIFIA loan, other funding sources would need to be contributed to the project in the form of grants from the state or federal government or some other borrowing. And with that, Nedco, I think I'll turn it over to you to discuss the funding dynamics of TIFIA.
Sure. Yeah. Next slide, please.
You want to hang on one second, just see if there's any questions from any of the board members. Any questions at this point for Ms. Schick before we go forward? Okay, Mr. Nedev, go right ahead.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you this morning. As I think on slide 7, in a way, this is an illustration of what Melissa was discussing, that it just lays out the potential funding sources for the capital improvement program. And I think this focuses on the T2 project in particular. Shouldn't get too hung up on the amounts. We've backed into these based on the programmatic limits. And we've discussed with Jerry and Brad and their staff. They will the specific numbers will continue to be subject to refinement as the size of the bucket we're trying to fill and exactly which sources we're able to fill it with crystallizes over time. Jerry and Brad and staff will continue, obviously, to pursue, to the extent they're available, grants, whether state or federal, because free money is cheap money is good. Free money is even better. The main point on this is, to the extent there is ultimately a funding gap that needs to be closed, and that necessitates a borrowing. We'll talk in a second why we think a TIFIA loan would be an attractive solution for at least part of it. So like a couple of key takeaways on this slide is, Melissa mentioned briefly, to the extent we do pursue a TIFIA loan, it can only fund a third of the total project. And to the extent we're fortunate enough to, Jerry and Brad are fortunate enough to secure other federal money, the overall federal support toward the project cannot exceed 80%. So one way or another, at least 20% of the projects must be funded with non-federal sources. I think on the next slide is so why are we kind of fixating and mentioning TIFIA at this stage? Is that the interest rate the program offers is quite attractive, and in the current market, it would offer a lower cost of funding than can be secured in the bond market. I think on the chart here, we've kind of laid out how TIFIA rates, which are essentially based on U.S. Treasuries, compare with tax-exempt bond yields, and the depending on the term of the borrowing for large capital projects, it's often they're most typically amortized over a longer time horizon, 20, 25, 30 years. And when you stretch out that long, you see that like for a term of that length, the TIFIA rates, basically U.S. Treasury rates, would be more attractive than you could get in the bond market. And these are fluid dynamics. Treasuries and muni bond rates kind of move in concert generally, not necessarily in lockstep. So this advantage we mentioned at the top, that for example, for a $10 million borrowing repaid over 30 years, the TIFIA alternative would save about $1.1 million in nominal interest costs, or if you do the math on a present value basis, it's about $870,000. So that advantage may widen, may tighten a little bit, but it is that kind of calculus that has us that makes the TIFIA alternative attractive, and something that, to the extent of borrowing is needed, we would probably recommend as sort of plan A. We mentioned a couple of times that TIFIA would only fund so much of a project, about a third of the total project costs. So depending on the size of the funding gap that needs to be closed, the ultimate solution may well be a combination of a TIFIA loan and a secondary borrowing. I know we're working with a couple of other agencies where that sort of fact pattern played out, and we had the bulk of the financing was a TIFIA loan amortized over 35 years at a really attractive interest rate. But because of the limitation on the size, we also had a secondary borrowing from private banks that were a little higher interest rate, and because of that, we amortized those as quickly as possible. So I think on the next slide, I think I'll hand it back to you, Melissa, on security. And
yeah, we just wanted to touch upon, certainly with a borrowing and considering a borrowing as the forward planning with regard to the debt repayment. And then also the security on a borrowing that would be required from whether it's a bond investor or a lending agency like the US DOT. So what we have found with other of the district's transit peers, that the security structure generally looks like a pledge of your fare box revenues, but the repayment of your obligation and the annual debt service really could be made from any legally available funds, which in many instances we see that the LTF revenue stream, so the local transportation fund revenues, tends to be used by other transit agencies with regard to the repayment of a loan or outstanding bond obligation. The one thing we would highlight, if a TIFIA loan is pursued, the district would not be able to use federal funding sources to repay the loan. So for example, any of your ongoing operating grants from the federal government, that would have to be excluded from the available revenue sources that could be used to pay down the loan. But really ultimately, and I think this is why Jerry and Brad are starting to consider the borrowing, is from a budgetary perspective, there would be an additional cost within your financial framework, and ultimately, MTD would need to ensure revenues are sufficient, budgeted, allocated, appropriated to make the debt payments. And next slide. So there's a lot of boxes and arrows on this slide, and I apologize, but it's mostly just to highlight that the bond issuance, transaction execution, and the TIFIA loan process are very different from an execution perspective. If the district were to issue a bond, it would probably take the upwards of 5 months, where the TIFIA loan process does tend to be a bit more involved and could take, up to a year to execute. And we highlight that just from the perspective of planning. We actually had an introductory call with the US DOT just to introduce Jerry and Brad to the TIFIA loan program and their project development staff. But as you think about needing to borrow, some of the execution helps with, if the borrowing's a year out and you're considering a TIFIA loan, it makes sense to start now. So that's, just something to bear in mind. Next
All
slide.
of the advantages come, they make you work for it. Look, the various advantages of the TIFIA loan we've been talking about, like the low rate and the drawdown feature that you only pay on amounts as you draw them. Prepayment flexibility, all of that comes at the expense of they make you work for it.
So really next steps as you think about the potential borrowing needs or plan of finance development for Terminal 2 is just that, is to refine the plan of finance. And I think first and foremost is to determine, we focus this discussion on borrowing, but really I think the idea is to first find non-borrowing funding sources for the project. And then to refine a plan of finance around that. And then the second would be on the credit and security structure, and just, establish kind of within the context of your existing financial framework, the ability to incur a debt payment in any given fiscal year, depending on the term of the borrowing. And then probably engaging additional advisors, whether it's K&N on a more formal basis, and then also an outside special finance counsel that really would help craft the legal framework for a borrowing if MTD were to pursue such. So with that, that concludes our discussion this morning, and we're more than happy to answer questions in tandem with Jerry and Brad.
Thank you very much. That's very, very informative. Board members, I open up to you to questions, comments. Don't everybody jump in at once. Director Sheeler. Director Sheeler, followed that by Director Perotti.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I actually have a lot of questions. This is a really important decision for the district, and I think it's interesting that we're at this point in time because we have tried to use all available local resources to pay our bills as we've gone along, rather than have to pull out a district credit card. So on these questions, one question I have for the folks making the presentation, what is a public disclosure statement? It's required for certain kinds of financing, but not for others. And I just wonder, what is a public disclosure statement?
Sure. If the district were to issue a bond in the public, the tax exempt securities market, it would require the development of a disclosure document, which is effectively a prospectus, right, on the district, outlining, your service area, your finances, and it just is an informed document that allows an investor to review you as an organization and make an investment decision. With a borrowing that's on a private placement basis, so for example, directly with a bank or with another governmental agency, with the state or the federal government, as in the TIFIA loan, that prospectus is not required because you are basically negotiating directly with one lender. And so they often, they perform their own due diligence and ask specific questions of the district. And so the development of that disclosure document is not necessary within a private placement or a direct lending basis.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. In terms of just getting a handle on the numbers that are being presented, and I know this is just kick this off, it's not set in stone, but the number $11 million was kind of used as a number. And just to note, and that was pretty much associated with the T2 project. And then on our next agenda item, it talks about to complete the project, this is with Stantec, it talks about $5.5 million. So I'm just wondering, those are two different numbers, sort of presumably for the same project, and maybe if the general manager cannot explain what the numbers are.
Yeah, happy to do so. Really, we're kind of coming at this in a phased approach. And what you'll hear in the next agenda item, we're going to lay out what you get for that 5.5 million, which is, a good portion of what we've talked about here in the Terminal 2 project. The other portion is the building itself. Together, they're about, and I'm rounding the numbers here, it's about 6 million a piece. 6 million for the building, another 6 million for everything from above ground, fuel tank, perimeter, fencing, et cetera. You'll hear all that in the next agenda item. So as a whole, it's about 12 million that we're estimating.
Okay.
And that's the number we asked KNN to use for the purposes of this informational item.
Okay, thanks. What available district resources are there for matching other than fares and the Kyrie Out project?
Yeah, I could take that one. It really have any proceeds that may be generated from Kyrie Out 3 to 5 years from now, possibly. But in the meantime, I think you'd look at the state transit assistance, which was listed on the slide, also LTF and fares. But I think STA is probably the best bet because, correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, but there's a sunset provision when you borrow. So for example, Measure A, capital funding that MTD receives, could be available as well, but Measure A sunsets in 2040. So you can't borrow against it beyond that point, whereas STA does not have a sunset provision.
Okay, as long as I'm on roll here, do you see MTD being awarded enough competitive grants to get a project to 80%? Or do you see having to also get private loans?
Well, I think the big reason I asked KNN to do this work is because I feel we need the tool in the toolbox. The reality is it's very competitive out there. On the federal side, I think with some of the changes you're hearing, it's possible we may compete a little bit better because of the age of our fleet, that sort of thing, but there's no guarantees. And on TIRCIP on the state side, we really need to work with our local jurisdictions. I mean, our projects need to be a priority in Santa Barbara County. If not, it's going to be difficult to compete. So I can't promise you anything other than we're going to put our best, make our best effort.
What is the role of SBCAG if you do TIFIA?
Well, other than I think making sure our project is a part of the all the planning documents that it needs to be, I think that's really the extent of it as far as their role in our particular project.
Okay, I'm looking at the longer term. I know we're talking about $11, $12 million, and that's for the T2 facility. But as long as the interest rates are very low and attractive right now, and the district does have other capital needs, rather than just considering T2 in interim borrowing situation, what if the district also wanted to purchase ZEV buses over the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we discussed it in the memo, and that there's master agreements on the TIFIA loan, and you can have multiple projects kind of that are approved, and that could include, my understanding, zero emission buses, bus replacement, certainly. We felt that for the purposes of this discussion, focusing on Terminal 2 would simplify things and make it understandable, but absolutely, we're going to have to seek grant not only grants, but potentially borrowing for other capital needs as well.
Okay, I'm starting to get near the end here. Let's say this is a scenario. What if the district could pledge local revenues of, let's say, $1 million? How much could be borrowed over a 30-year time frame?
You mean against you mean against an annual payment of $1 million a year?
Yes.
Is that what you
Just an approximation.
I want to say something in the $18 to $20 million range, but if we keep talking, I'll come back with a better number.
Okay, I appreciate that. That is ballpark. I just wanted to put that out there. That might be important at some point in time. And then the last two things I wanted to bring up is that this is really complicated, and the report really helped explain it, but I still, as you can see, I had a lot of questions. And if it's possible to simplify it or set up a chart with the plus and minuses, because there's so many different alternatives and options based on what we do. And it's, like I said, a big decision. And lastly, since it's a big decision, and since we're now at full strength as a board, perhaps this is something that our finance committee and or our fleet and facilities committee could take a more closer look at. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Sheeler. I think as we move forward with specific projects, that's exactly the path we'll be taking. Director Perotti.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciated all the information that I received. And thank you, Director Sheeler, for all the questions that you always come up with. Great questions. And a couple in there were ones that I had. But basically, I just wanted to say, it looks to me, I like the suggestion that Director Sheeler suggested was the pros and the cons, and I like looking at that myself. That's very helpful to me. But it looks like if we were to go with TIFIA and the time frame is a year, I guess this is a Jerry question. Is that something? What's your vision for when are we really making that decision? Bonds versus TIFIA. How do you see that playing out in the future?
Yeah, really, I think what we've identified in our 5-year forecast that Brad put together is in use of our existing revenue streams, capital, as well as what's left of the TIRSA funds in our partnership with SB CAG from a few years ago to get the first phase of Terminal 2 started. And I think that right now is kind of the plan. It'd be great if we get some grants in the meantime to offset that. But I think in this next year, 2021, this next round of 5339 competitive funding, and the next round of TIRSA, which is coming up, I think, early in 2022, we need to target those two funding opportunities. And if we can get a big award, that'll factor in, because if you get TIRSA, that's state funding, which affects how much of the borrowing, what percentage, that sort of thing. Whereas if it's more federal funds in the 5339 that were awarded, well, that changes the mix as well of what to borrow. So I think realistically, we're looking at a decision. Because remember, this is informational day. It's sometime in 2022, early 2022. And at that point, we'll have time to work with the Fleet Facilities Committee and the Finance Committee, or an ad hoc of the two chairs, to kind of identify what should be that ask if we need to borrow, if we aren't unsuccessful on kind of planning the grants that we need.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. That's all my questions.
Great. Director Tabor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'd like this discussion, this new information. We know where we are and we have a good idea of where we need to go. So point A, point B, and so far, using Jerry's analogy, we have not had the tools in our toolbox to get there. So I appreciate having these additional tools available to us. And as Mr. Sheeler indicated, there are still quite a few questions, but it's time to put a plan together to get from point A to point B. And I don't think anything is a one tool approach. As we make this path going forward, it's going to be pulling together funds from all different sources as they are available. So one question I had about the TIFIA funds, do those come from the Treasury, or do they hand you off to a private lender?
They're directly from the USDOT, so it's an appropriation. Nedco, do you recall? I mean, they do have. It's within the billions of amount that they have appropriated and available to lend.
Okay, thank you. I like the idea of letter of credit type payments was really good news. And one other thought I had is this is a big step for us, but committing our funds to in such a budgeted way. But we already do that with matching fund projects. We have to set aside so much of our funds in order to get additional funds. And to me, it's a very similar approach. So appreciate seeing a better path forward, knowing what's available to us. And I think we should start laying out a plan here.
Well,
Thank you.
Director Tabor, you're chair of the finance committee. We're going to be looking to you to
Let's do it.
take the lead, man. So it's going to be on your desk.
Just to close the loop to on Director Sheeler's question,
Please.
kind of did some quick math, and it really is about 20 million. That $1 million payment over 30 years would get you about 20 million in proceeds. I did that based on a slightly like if we were actually closing today, it would probably be an even higher number just because rates are attractive. In the planning stages, we tend to advise kind of adding a little bit of cushion for interest rates to deteriorate. So it is something in the 20 million range.
Good, thank you for the information. Director McCory, did I see your hand up?
Yeah. Are these TIFIA funds, are these non-federal funds? That wasn't clear to me. Are we talking about seeking federal funds through the TIFIA process, or is that something where the feds are not involved?
The TIFIA loan is a loan of the federal government. So the federal government is very much involved, and they also work closely with your local FTA group with regard to the execution. So that loan is very much federal and coming from the DOT, and it's and that's kind of, as Nedco touched upon, why there's restrictions around the percentage of federal contribution that could be made to the project, because TIFIA is all federal.
Okay, I guess my next question is, at what point in time do we start putting the plans for the T2 into the FTIP?
Sure.
Yeah, I think we'll be doing that soon. I mean, the next agenda item will be talking about the working with Stantec on the professional services side for the design recommission of Terminal 2. And at that point, I think we'll be prepared to approach SBCAG with any modifications of the TIP that we need to do.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay. I think I've had questions from all board members. Oh, Director Sarkar.
One question I had in the other and the local bullet point you had there, would it be possible to have philanthropic or donations for the capital camp or the physical campaign for some of this funds, or has that been thought about?
Jerry?
Yeah, I think that's something any public agency could potentially explore. It's unusual for government agencies like the district to receive those types of funding, but absolutely, you know, if somebody was willing to consider that, we'd be happy to have the conversation and explore the possibilities.
I mean, I think why I bring it up specifically is due to the fact that, you know, we've just put out a goal of, you know, going electric before the state requirement. So I think there's goodwill out there for this, you know, project in our region.
Agreed.
Okay. I think I'm going to wrap it at that point. We do have other items coming on the agenda. Ms. Schick and Mr. Dedev, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure we'll be talking to you and you'll be working with staff as we go forward in the future. So again, thank you so much for the presentation this morning. I think it was right on target. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next item. Item 9, the acceptance of Stantec architectural proposal, design, and construction support for recommissioning of Terminal 2. Mr. Strada, you want to introduce this? And good morning, Mr. Rapinski.
Good morning.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rapinski, who's working with MTD, has joined us as an employee while Mr. Grip is on his paternity leave. We really appreciate Dave's assistance on a lot of these capital projects. We're lucky to have someone of his caliber in the community. And with that, I'm going to hand this off for him to share a little bit about what it is Stantec is proposing as far as the recommissioning and what staff is recommending so that we can go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning, board members. It's a pleasure to be before you this morning. I'll try to be brief, yet hopefully allow for enough questioning at the end. The timing is perfect on this item as we move forward with the T2 recommissioning. The item before you is a request that your board grant the general manager authority to proceed with the task order to the existing on-call architectural and engineering services contract with Stantec Architecture. This task order is, in fact, for the design and construction support services as part of phase 1 of the recommissioning of Terminal 2. So by way of background, as you know, T2 was decommissioned in 2004. And so now as we move forward, it's been identified that this recommissioning of T2 will in fact occur in multiple phases for the obvious reasons we've just discussed, financial and otherwise. The terminal reopening, I did want to point out, though, will provide MTD once it happens for this first phase we're talking about, and for the future, will provide MTD with operational efficiencies such as reduced deadhead hours, reduced deadhead miles, fuel savings, and absolutely bus parking relief from Terminal 1 that you're experiencing today. The proposal that was received from Stantec back last month, after they were challenged with providing a proposal to introduce operations and maintenance at Terminal 2 in this phased approach with up to between 10 and 20 buses being served at this facility. So they submitted a proposal to your general manager with 5 design and support deliverable tasks at a cost of $498,000. The fiscal year 2021-22 budget does include $3.2 million for the Terminal 2 recommissioning. But as has already been pointed out, it's already known that the phase 1 as well as the entire recommissioning of Terminal 2 will be a multi-year project. But was pointed out, we have identified at least up to $5.5 million over the next few years to allow us to do that which what we've given to Stantec in terms of their scoping and their proposal they've submitted to the agency. So with that, Madam Clerk, if we could go to the next slide. Whoop, it's sideways. I'm not sure.
We can read sideways.
There's a lot on here, so it's
One moment.
Oh. So what I will tell you is one of the charges to Stantec was, in fact, to what would it take? And they identified 20 improvements that would allow us to move in between 10 and 20 vehicles into that facility with all the staff and what we'd need to do to have operations there to accommodate that. And of those 20 improvements, I was hoping to walk you through them visually. We'll see. If not, Jerry, I can always start verbally. You tell me how you like this, because I certainly don't want to waste the board's time.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with discussion.
All right, let's do that.
What the major components are that we're going to focus on.
So of those 20 I've mentioned to you, the first one would be for an above ground diesel storage system. This system would be a temporary diesel fueling system, temporary in that, as we know, MTD is going to be electrifying its entire fleet. And so this will allow you during that interim period, when you move vehicles over as part of phase 1, to be able to fuel those vehicles for as long as that diesel fuel is needed. That would be one large above ground improvement. It's a 12,000 gallon diesel above ground tank. The second improvement would be for perimeter fencing. This would be around the entirety of the property. The existing fencing would be removed and new security fencing up as high as 8 feet high to protect MTD's capital assets would be put in place. There it is. Still small, and for those of you who have older eyes and need reading glasses, I may be squinting, so forgive me. So the perimeter fencing I mentioned, all replacing the entirety of the fencing around the property to protect the assets as well as those valuable employees that are going to be working at that facility. I'll go back and now I skipped one. So what you'll notice down at the southern portion of that diagram, first you'll see the 12,000 gallon fuel dispenser. That was item number 1, the above ground tank. There's a legend on the side that shows 9 improvements. There's 12 in total. I'll walk you through the other 3. Right immediately adjacent to the fuel dispenser system, you'll see something labeled Fair Vault and Canopy. And what that is that that's going to be a new fare box island that's going to allow for the removal of cash fare boxes, replacement with others, and will be wired to probe these fare boxes as the buses drive through the property. The third item I've already touched on, which is perimeter fencing. So I'm going to skip to item number 4. No surprise that MTD's fleet and its systems have become more sophisticated from the IT perspective. So this improvement would be for IT communications and a security system, with the thought being that we're going to now introduce the hardware necessary for IT purposes, as well as any data communication lines and the like. And the security cameras will be tied into that IT system, and they will be placed strategically throughout the Terminal 2 facility. Item 5 would be electrical improvements, clearly to support the IT and all the other needs for operations and maintenance. The panel would need to be upgraded and or modified to provide the electrical needs for Terminal 2 going forward. That's item number 5. Number 6, the lighting. There is lighting that exists throughout the property right now. However, it was identified that this would all need to be replaced to a more modern LED standard and the like. So all of the lighting around the property will be replaced. Again, this is identified per Stantec. Number 7 is building improvements. These are minor improvements. And what I mean by that is that for those staff that will be working out of the buildings that exist on T2, it would be minor improvements such as carpeting, such as painting, and then and furniture. And that's what we mean by these minor tenant improvements. Landscaping, if you look to the far southeast portion of the property, you'll see landscaped area all the way down there at the bottom. This will mean replacing the existing landscaping and then adding new landscaping that's actually going to improve visibility, and which is another item that I want to get to in a moment, the need for this improved visibility. And the 9th item on your list there is for the bus wash. Again, if you look at the southern portion of the plant, highlighted in blue, it says Wash Bay. There is actually an existing bus wash structure there already. However, this would need to be, the plumbing would need to be redone, electrical would need to be redone, and a new bus wash rack installed within to get you the kind of bus wash capacity that you have currently today at Terminal 1. The 11th item not featured, 10th item not featured. If you'll see, there's captioned in balloons around or bubbles around the property, starting at the far northern portion on Overpass Road. You'll see a name, new sliding vehicle exit gate. If you follow Overpass Road all the way down along the side of the property, there's another new automatic vehicle gate. And then finally, there's a new driveway curb cut. This improvement, these improvements are part of a new entrance and exit strategy from the property. This was thought of by Stantec to safely get the vehicles through the property and safely introduce them back out onto Overpass Road. This will all be done in coordination, obviously, with the city of Goleta, just to make sure that the flow is most efficient and necessary from a safety perspective. That's what that 10th item would consist of. Number 11 on their list of improvements would be, if you see in the center of the site plan, there's something called center canopy, the bus parking canopy there, and then immediately to the north, there's another bus parking canopy. This is significant. These canopies will be refurbished with a new roof, and be refurbished in a manner that will allow for photovoltaic panels to be installed on top. It will be electrified. As the fleet continues to be electrified, you'd be able to charge right there underneath those canopies. So that's that forward thinking that was kind of put into the minds of the Stantec engineers. And then the final improvement, the 12th one, would be to the building proper. These are general building improvements different than number 7. The minor improvements. This would be things like a new HVAC system, redoing and or revisiting the plumbing just to make sure that everything is okay per code. And then finally, any seismic safety or other safety improvements that would need to be done to safely repopulate those buildings with MTD staff. Stantec will take these, if you give your general manager approval today, we'll take these designs and add more substance to them, including cost for each of the 12 items to allow your general manager and staff to decide how best to proceed, what to proceed with. And then that will then be formalized in the form of construction drawings, plans that would be submitted to the city of Goleta for approval. Two other elements to Stantec's task order would also include assisting staff with selection of a construction contractor to do all the work that we're identifying here as part of phase one. And then the third and final piece would Stantec would also be available on call to provide construction support services during the actual construction of all of the improvements that we've just briefly talked about for Terminal 2. So that's the entirety of the task order. And moving forward, I've been talking really fast. I'm going to stop talking now and would ask your board, should you have any questions, please.
Good presentation, Mr. Pinsky. Thank you very much for that. Are there questions from the board? Director Tabor?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Dave. There's information in the staff report about when the site was decommissioned. When was it first put into service? So I can wrap my head around exactly how much needs to be done to that building.
Oh, I would have to, this is, I'm not sure exactly, but probably in the 70s, I think, or
Okay.
very early 80s.
Right. Thanks.
Other questions? Director Sheeler?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there was discussion about citing 10 to 20 buses at T2. Is that the maximum number of buses that the site would be able to hold? And looking further into the future for the district, is having 20 buses going to be adequate for that?
I can take that one.
Deployment?
Yeah, really what we're starting for recommissioning, 8 to 10 buses is really just to get us started. One of the issues is going to be employee parking in the long run. So we're going to have to park people on the facility within essentially our property to get started. So 8 to 10 vehicles. It also works for our current size of our maintenance department with the number of mechanics. That's about the maximum before it becomes problematic in putting more vehicles. So we'll have to gear up, you know, both on the staffing, et cetera, and realign shifts, that sort of thing. But ultimately, we're going to have to deal with long-term the parking issue before we can maximize that site to about 35 buses. So we're starting with 8 to 10. 8 to 10 is also kind of the sweet spot we've learned when you're working with Southern California Edison for their Charge Ready grant application program, so that they'll come in and do the upgrades necessary to support the electric buses. We'll probably need a grant award to pay for about 8 to 10 ZEBs at some point so that we can approach the infrastructure discussion with Edison as well. So there's a number of phases in grant applications, which is why we had the agenda item earlier.
Other questions? Director McCrory?
You're on mute, I believe.
Yeah, you are. Chuck, you're muted again.
There we go.
There you go.
In looking at the drawings, it looks like the when the buses come in from duty, they're going to go to the bus wash, and the fare box is there, or the vault is there, and I'm wondering when they go through, and I guess the vault is exercised and pulls the money out. Where is there a place for either the money to be counted, or what happens to it after it comes out of the bus?
Well, I'll start, and Jerry, would you like to support what I say? The island would actually have a canister that would accept the feed of an actual vault placed in it. It would be then dumped pulled out empty, and then it could be deposited back on the vehicle. That larger vault from a security perspective would need to be removed. And that would be either counted on site or taken. I'm not quite sure whether MTD actually uses the services of an armored car service or not, but that's one method with this type of design. So Jerry, if I screwed that up, please.
No, that was an excellent explanation. Essentially, it's a mobile safe within the vault that the appropriate folks have access to, can wheel out. It's secure. Now, the nice thing, and I don't want to go too much into the security aspects of things, but in the old building, there's a vault room. And it's, it just needs to be refurbished, and we should be in good shape.
Okay.
Other questions? Director Sheeler, was that a hand raised? Okay, no. Okay. I'm going to go to the clerk. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone under public comment who wishes to speak?
We do not have any public comments at this time.
Okay, that brings us back to the board. The recommendation is to give the general manager authority to proceed for the task order number 5 with Stantec Architecture for the design and construction support services for facility improvements necessary to phase 1 of the recommissioning of MTD Terminal 2. Looking for a motion to that effect.
So moved, Chair.
By Director Perotti. Is there a second?
Second.
Director Tabor is seconded. I will do a roll call vote. Okay. Starting at the top, Director Perotti.
Aye.
Director Limburger is absent. Director McQuarrie.
Aye.
Director Sheeler.
Yes.
Director Sakar.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
Chair Davis votes yes. The motion passes unanimously with 1 absence. Mr. Rapinski, great to have you on board for this work, and thank you very much for the presentation this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. That moves us on then to item 10. Item 10 is an informational item also. This is the Federal Transit Authority fiscal year 2021 triennial review of MTD. Mr. Estrada?
Yeah, but before I hand this off to Mr. Moss to walk you through his presentation and share a lot of the good news, I'd like to thank not only Steve, but the entire team, all of our employees, mechanics, our drivers, our staff, to get a result like this. It's not easy on the compliance side, but it's what you do every day that makes a difference, because the reviewers come in and really take a look at all of your practices from the planning side to the procurement to your safety program as well. And, really, hats off to the entire team for their great work. And, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Steve to take you through the details of the report. Steve?
Thanks, General Manager, and good morning, Chair Davis and members of the board. Next slide, please. So every 3 years, the FTA does a review of every transit agency that receives funding from the 5307 program to ensure that the agency is complying with the multitude of requirements that FTA requires us to comply with. This has been mandated by Congress in 1982. And they use it in their required reporting to the US DOT Secretary and to Congress that FTA is mandated to do. So, and I should add too, FTA staff, they always say they look at this as an opportunity not to punish you if you're not doing something right, but to assist you in amending your practices to do it right. And so, they don't look on it as a punitive exercise, but more as a way to provide the technical assistance to help you get your act in order if you're having some issues. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. So there's 21 areas that they look at currently. They change this up now and then, but this last review is 21 items. The last 2 on the list, section 5310, 5311, we don't currently receive funding from those programs, so they don't apply. And up the list a little bit, school bus and charter bus, we don't offer either of those, so we're not, they don't look at us on those 2 either. The remaining 17 items were the ones that they did look at, and as Jerry mentioned, we we did not have any findings of deficiencies, which we were very happy with. And, actually proud of that. And I want to reiterate what Jerry said. Every department, every employee contributes to FTA's, to our success in complying with these FTA requirements. We were required to submit many documents, many answers to many questions. And it's a joint effort of, like I say, the entire staff. Thanks. Next slide, please. So we've had a good record with these. 5 of the 6, including this one, most recent triennial reviews, had no deficiencies in the final report. One of them did have a deficiency in the draft report, which we resolved before the final report was issued. We did have some findings in 2017, the prior report, but we were able to resolve them quickly, and FTA was happy with our response on those. So we think that's just really good. I don't know, I'm sure not very many transit agencies in the country that have had that much success with their triennial reviews. Next slide, please. So as you all are aware of, we expect that the Santa Barbara urbanized area will be found to be over 200,000 when the results of the census for UZAs comes out. We don't know that for certain, but we're kind of assuming that that's going to happen. So aside from the other issues associated with that, financial issues and so forth, there's also issues associated with our requirements under the FTA 5307 program. For example, some of our rewards currently we report annually. We'll have to report quarterly on all awards. The Buy America requirements, we'll have to have a resident inspector when buses are being built with up to 10 buses. Currently, we don't have to do that unless we buy 20 buses, which we seldom do at one time. 10, we do that, so that's going to be an issue. The biggest one really is Title VI, non-discrimination. There's a whole slew of new requirements that come on board for Title VI if you go over 200,000, such as required demographic analysis and ridership analysis based on surveys. We have to monitor service standards to a much greater extent than we're required to now. And a big one is whenever we're doing a major service change, which major service change can be defined by the agency. When we're doing a major service change or a fare change, we'll have to do what they call equity analysis to make sure that there's not a disparate impact on protected populations such as minorities and low income folks. So there's going to be some changes there. And that, like I say, the Title VI requirements are probably the biggest one. Next slide, please. The other thing that will happen if we go over 200,000 is designated recipients. So a little bit of background on this. The MTD currently is what's called a direct recipient, which means that we can directly contract with FTA through our grant applications to receive money directly from the agency. It does not, from FTA, it does not have to flow through another agency. However, we are not a designated recipient, which is currently when you're under 200,000 falls to the governor of the state, who in California has delegated that to Caltrans. So Caltrans is currently our designated recipient. Caltrans has to approve our applications for federal funds. It's not an issue. They've never questioned us. They've always been more than happy to do so. But we go over 200,000, there'll need to be a local designated recipient, and that can be either the direct recipient, which we're the only ones in the urbanized area. It could be the MPO, SBCAG, or it could continue to be the state, Caltrans, but one of those agencies would have to be designated recipient. MTD has decades of experience, probably approaching 50 years of experience working with federal grants, and it seems like we would be a good choice. Next slide, please. Actually, that's the end of it. So with that, I'd like to ask if there's any questions. Be happy to try and answer those.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Moss. I do have one before I get to everybody else. Who makes the decision on who is the designated recipient? What's the process, and who has the final say on that?
It's a combination of the state, the representatives of the UZA, in other words, the city councils and mayors of the 3 cities that are included, and the county for the unincorporated areas.
Yeah, so it's the individual partners that are here in our case, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great.
Steve, is it a 75% requirement, you think, of the representative of the population or something like that, of the cities?
75% sounds right. Unfortunately, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I believe you're right.
And I had one other question, just, you said that major service change being defined by the agency. Did you mean by the feds or by the local
Oh,
agency?
the local agency. MTD can define a major service change as long as it meets FTA requirements. You know, they could challenge it if they thought we were not being.
Good, thank you. Okay, questions, board members, directors? Okay, Director Tabor.
Mr. Chair, I didn't have a question so much as a couple comments. One, realizing this is just the tip of the iceberg in the reporting that we do. I always remember being a new board member and being blown away seeing the list of all the hoops we have to step through on a regular basis. And also, I think it was one of these reports when I was first on where it just lays out what we do very clearly and simply. So I hope Arjun gets the information that's in here. And the third thing here is that I just identifies for me what a great job our staff do on a daily basis, moment by moment. So I guess what I have to say is keep up the good work.
Oh, there was actually one other thing I meant to mention. The staff report refers to the draft triennial review report, which was, we hadn't not yet received the final when I put that together. We did receive the final. There were no changes from the draft. So.
Good. And you're here to the comment relative to the good work that the staff does. Okay. Not seeing any other comments. Madam Clerk, does anyone wish to speak on this item?
I have no public comments.
No public comment. This is an informational item. Again, please pass on to the rest of the staff our compliments for another clean report. Congratulations to everybody. You bet.
Thank you. Will do.
That takes us to item 11. Item 11 is the MTD fiscal year 2022 through 2024 overall goal for disadvantaged business enterprise participation. Mr. Strada, you want to open it?
Yeah, I'm going to hand this right off to Mr. Moss. Seems like we just had a good segue to this topic.
Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. So as the title of the report says, every 3 years we are required to prepare a DB goal. DBEs are firms that are 51% or more controlled by a member of a disadvantaged community or by a female. And they have to be a small business, which requires that their annual income doesn't exceed certain levels. And they also have to be certified by the California United Certification Program, which is operated by Caltrans. And we can go on there always anytime and find out if a particular firm is a certified DBE. Now, if a firm that we work with or might consider working with wants to become a certified DBE and meets the requirements, we don't do the certification ourselves, but we always inform people we're more than happy to assist them in becoming certified, usually through the LA MTA office, which obviously, to no surprise, is a certifying agency. So this draft triennial goal is one I've been, there's a fairly specific methodology that's laid out by FTA that you go through to determine what your goal for the 3 years should be. In our case, we look at, because our 5307, this is based on your primarily on your 5307 funding. Since we use it for operating assistance, we look at how much of our operating budget for the year is federal, and then take that percentage of our budget is the percentage of our projects that are federally funded. Typically, that's more in the 22 maybe percentage range because it's only 5307. However, this year and the next few years, all of the CRISA, ARPA, and CARES Act money, the COVID relief, 3 COVID relief programs, are considered 5307 by FTA. And so our percentage of federal funding for this current fiscal year ended up at 43%, which means a much greater share of our budget is now federal. Comes out to 6.6 million of the amount of our funding that is available for contracting opportunities. Obviously, the bulk of our budget is salaries and benefits. That is not a contracting opportunity. When we look at our budget item by item, we come up with the list of items, which is shown on page 2 of the document, of the items that we consider to be contracting opportunities. Those total up to about 6.6 million. When you look at 43% of that, $2.8 million are available of federal money for contracting opportunities. We also have one capital project this time that is federally funded. That's the contactless fare payment system we're funding out of one of the COVID relief programs. So then the next step is to look at what percentage of that 2.8 million should go to DB firms if there was a level playing field, if there is a level playing field. Now, the way that we approach that is to look at the total number of firms that are available in those same lines of work in our service area, and then also look at the number of certified DBEs that are available. When for the total number of firms, I use this US Census data source that's called the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS codes. What we used for our service area for the purposes of this analysis for all firms was basically Caltrans Districts 5, which is our district, which includes from Santa Cruz County down to Santa Barbara County, and the district that includes Los Angeles and Ventura counties. And I found nearly 70,000 firms that would do the work in the fields that we're looking at in that service area. And then for looking at the certified DBEs, the criteria I use there is any firm that is a certified DBE that has indicated an interest in working in Santa Barbara County. They might be out of state, they might be anywhere in the state. And I found a total of approximately 1,800 firms in those categories that are DBEs that are interested in working in our county. So that comes out to about 2.6%. The next step is to do a weighting process where you look at the categories of work you're doing and weight them based on how much funds are in each one. That lowered the percentage slightly, so we ended up at 2.3%. 2.32% of funds, which of the six, again, this is of the 2.8 million. When there's a level playing field, we would expect that 2.32% of those funds would go to DBEs. That comes out to where's that number? Sorry, $65,500. There's a final step where you look at different ways that you might adjust that number. I went through all of those and found no basis to adjust that number, so I ended up with our final goal of 2.32%. Now that pretty much gets us through the methodology to arrive at your goal. There's a requirement for a public input process where you have to give the public and interested firms an opportunity to comment on your methodology, and also just to inform them of your DB program. We posted the draft goal on our website on June 30th, and Hillary and her team also put on a news item under MTD News to tell about the program. And then yesterday, Hillary and her team arranged with me to do a Zoom webinar, which the information was sent out to a whole wide range of potentially interested firms. Unfortunately, we did not get any takers. So the Zoom webinar was Hillary and me and a gentleman from Santa Maria who's also working on their DB program. We tried over the years many different ways of trying to generate more interest in this process have not been successful. But you know, the webinar that we held does at least at any rate meet the requirement, but unfortunately it did not generate us any potentially interested firms. So with that, I would open up for any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Voss, for the presentation.
Oh,
And
one
Jack-
thing more I should add, I'm sorry. I do intend to make one change to the document, which is just to describe, as I just did, the results of our Zoom webinar. So I will add a sentence or two to the report before.
The results would be, I don't think we need that to affect our recommendation today. And you answered my question relative to what our experience has been and in the past, and also the outreach. So questions from the board members? Okay, I don't see any. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment?
And at this time, I do see Director Perotti has her hand raised.
Paul, I tell you, that hand raise works, but I don't look for it. Anyway, Director
Yeah,
Perotti.
and I found it late in the game, so I'm sure it popped up, you know, after you asked for comments. I guess my one quick question is when we solicit a public participation, are we only doing it social media, or are we doing any other outreach? And maybe I missed that in the presentation. Is it only through social media and newspaper, or how? Any hard copies? How else do we get the word out, I guess?
In past cycles, we have done in-person meetings. This time we elected to go with the virtual, with still, you know, the COVID concerns. And Hillary, do you have any, Ms. Blackerby might have something she'd like to add to that.
Sure. Good morning, Chair and board members. Director Perotti, we did send out a press release about this and sent it also directly to the various chambers of commerce, weave, lots of different organizations, actually specific businesses that we know if they certified, you know, that they would qualify to be a DBE. And so we tried to do all of those things and unfortunately didn't have any takers. So
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments at this point before we go to a motion? Not seeing any of the action, the recommended action is the board approve MTD's draft fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2024 overall goal for disadvantaged business enterprise participation in federal transit administration assistance programs. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Director Perotti. Is there a second?
Second.
Director McCrory seconded it. I will do a roll call vote. Director Perotti,
Aye.
Limburger is absent. Director McCrory. Chuck, you're muted.
Aye. Sorry.
Director Sheeler,
Yes.
Director Sarkar,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
Chair Davis votes yes. Motion passes 6-0 with one absent. Thank you very much, Mr. Moss, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Item 12, General Manager Report. Jerry.
Yeah, I just have really two aspects of it that I want to highlight, and then, you know, be prepared to answer any questions. The first is, you know, good news. We're close to launching our contactless fare payment pilot project, and that's a partnership with the state of California, the integrated travel project that we've mentioned before. It's going to be limited just to 1224 for the pilot at this stage. There are other phases that we're working with UCSB exploring and doing a little bit more. We're hoping to launch Monday. That's our intent. And I really want to congratulate, you know, the team here for getting us to this point. It's been a lot of work. Mr. Davis, you know, Mr. Perez, Mr. Zuniga, Mr. Sheldon, Ms. Blackerby, they've all worked really hard. Hope I didn't miss anyone to get everything from the marketing information for the public, that sort of thing, as well as the technology. I mean, these pilots aren't easy to do. but they're worth it. This is something I think we need to do in our industry in the future, is to make it easier for people to travel across public transit with different forms of media. It's something that's long overdue, and we're happy, I think, to be the second or third agency in the state to be able to test this. Monterey's gone first with a full deployment. I think SBCAG and the Clean Air Express is also looking to launch on Monday. We're trying to do a joint press release on that, is the hope, but we definitely look forward to launching on Monday. The other item, I just want to highlight a couple of retirements. A couple of our bus operators, Mr. Harrigan at 35 years, and Ms. Brandt, have all made that decision to retire, and we want to just acknowledge their hard work over the years and how much we appreciate them. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Strada? Thank you, Jerry, for the report, and pass on our congratulations to the retirees. Thank them for their service. Okay, we have two closed session items. I will have to read both of them, and then we'll look for public comment. Item 13 is a recess to closed session regarding real property negotiations pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8. Property is 4678 Carreal and 49 North San Antonio. The agency negotiators, General Manager Jerry Estrada, District Outside Counsel Graham Lyons. Negotiating parties are Chandler Partners and Con Am Group. Under negotiation is the price and terms of payment. Item 14 is a recess to closed session conference with labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, subsections B1, 54957.6. The agency designated representative is MTD General Manager Jerry Estrada, and the subject is the unrepresented employees performance review. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone wishing to speak on closed session items before we go into closed session?
Nobody at this time.
Nobody at this time. Okay, we'll take a few minutes. I want to close out, Jerry, and get us to closed session.
Will do.
We will be coming back and do have one item on the open agenda when we get back. That's other business and reports before adjournment. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, we'll just need all non-board members to sign off. And then we'll have to clear the attendees as well. Then we should be prepared to move into closed session. A few minutes.
So waiting, Arjun. Did I mispronounce your name, your last name when I used you earlier? Give me a good pronunciation for your last name.
Sarkar is perfect, Dave. You did
Sarkar.
great. Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Jerry?
So you're finishing that? A few more minutes. Apologies.
Oh. Still live on YouTube.
Jerry, can you make me host and I'll give it back to you?
Okay.